Our guest on this topic is François Gemenne, lead author of France's International Panel on Climate Change. And you are in Dubai following the COP28 as it comes to a close. Tell us, you who are there, what strikes you about this round of the COP Climate Conference? What have you found? What has struck you?
Well, clearly what strikes me is that we are finally addressing the elephant in the room, which are fossil fuels, and it is quite paradoxical that we're addressing this elephant at the very place where oil is being produced. So this is not the least of the paradoxes of this COP, but obviously what is clear is that we have a massive divergence of views between the way countries envision their energy future. You have some countries that are ready to envision their energy future outside of fossil fuels. That is the case of the EU, that is the case of the US, of some countries of the global south. And then you have countries like Saudi Arabia or Russia, which are simply not ready to give up on fossil fuels. And that's as simple as that. And given that every decision here has to be adopted by consensus, as long as some countries are not willing to commit to phasing out fossil fuels, I'm afraid there cannot be any ambitious agreement. So really the challenge of the presidency this afternoon will be to come up with a new text with a renewed level of ambition so that all the positive aspects of this COP28 so far, the fund on loss and damage, the fund to support the energy transition of the global south, so that these points are not forgotten in the final stock-taking of the conference.
What would it take? What would it take, in your view, to reconcile these two camps? You know, on one hand, as you said, there are countries that depend on natural resources like fossil fuels for their economy, and those who are seeking to phase them out. What would it take to get them to agree? Is it even possible today, in your view?
Yeah, well, I think it would take two things. One is a possible alternative. That is, for those countries whose only wealth or path to development is based on fossil fuels, what is the alternative? And we know that the level of investment in the energy transition in the global south remain dramatically low. Two, I think we would need differentiated commitments. We need to recognize that not all countries have the same resources, not all countries are starting from the same point, and therefore we will need differentiated commitments. And the problem is that if we need a kind of global consensus on one text, on one paragraph on the phasing out, then I'm afraid it will not be possible. On the other hand, if you have differentiated commitment, then I think there is a way out that is possible.
What do you say to this to this criticism that this is a Western project? This is a rich country project. This is one that poor countries like Bangladesh or other countries in Africa that are being hit by climate change, or even in the middle of the sea, that they cannot afford to pay for this, or countries like India that says we are not responsible for these global emissions, the vast majority of them, and you are yet wanting us to pay for that as well. What would you say? What can we say to these countries that doesn't come off as being patronizing or condescending?
This is a really legitimate concern from countries of the global south, and indeed they're denouncing some posture of the West as being hypocritical, and they're saying, well, look, you've used all your fossil fuels and now you're denying us the right to use our own fossil fuels. And at the same time, you're not willing to pay for the energy transition or for the impacts of climate change in the global south, which is the reason why climate justice is really the cornerstone of an agreement. And we had made really a massive headway in the first week of this conference with the agreement on the fund for loss and damage, which is really the cornerstone of climate justice. And clearly, if these concerns from countries of the global south are not taken into account, I don't see any agreement possible, and countries of the global south would be right to denounce an hypocritical position from industrialized countries.
François Gemenne, one last question for you. You mentioned, the fact that this conference is taking place in Dubai, a place that depends on fossil fuels for its economy. The next one is supposed to take place apparently in Azerbaijan, that is also very dependent on selling and on transiting these fossil fuels. fuels to Europe and from Russia as well. You know, what is the place? I mean, how can we embrace these countries that are responsible for much of the current fossil fuel production? What is their place in the climate change, you know, conference and negotiations that are taking place right now?
Yeah, you're right to say, and perhaps the idea of organizing these conferences in oil-producing countries is a move to try to embark these countries and not to let them on the side of the road. This being said, we need to recognize that we've been delaying this conversation for about 27 or 28 years. I mean, for years, we kind of circumvented the elephant in the room, which is really fossil fuels, which are responsible for about 75% of the problem. Now that we are addressing them frontally, we realize that it is, of course, becoming much more difficult and that different countries have different visions of the future, including, of course, oil-producing countries.
Thank you so much for joining us on France 24. It's been precious to have your take on this COP28 that is coming to a close in Dubai. Thank you for speaking to us.